Hello, everyone. Sarah Barker with Connect Our Elders, and this is the Empowering Aging podcast. Today, I'm very happy to have with me Trevor Lighten, the owner of the Lighten Group. Trevor, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So, you have an extensive background. Would you mind sharing with the audience how you found yourself in senior care?
Yeah, you bet. So, I started right out of college. I actually got into pharmaceutical sales, and I did that for 10 years. And it was good at the time. I was raising a young family, and but several years into it, it started feeling like, that I wasn't being fulfilled, wasn't being challenged, and always had a desire for entrepreneurship. And so I actually took a severance package from the pharmaceutical company that gave me a little bit of time and a little bit of startup money, but still not quite sure what I wanted to do. And it's kind of interesting how it happened. I just started looking for businesses to sell. And I mean, if you go to any of the businesses for sale websites, you're going to see a lot of home care stuff, a lot of franchises for sale and things like that. But I was a little bit more drawn to medical home health. And so, I wish I could say like, I had this amazing experience with home health or hospice, and it touched someone in my family. It really wasn't like that. It was just, I do this because it's a business that I can feel good about. And that's, I think, what drew me to home health. And so I didn't end up buying one. I ended up starting one from scratch, which was, boy, if I knew what I was getting into. And in business, you kind of have a rosy pro forma, and this was my experience of getting into home health. I made it through, and the accreditation process, it took 6 months. I went 8 months without a paycheck, and that was in 2014. And so 2 years later, I started a hospice. So I attached that to my home health to a hospice license, and grew that. Ended up at about a little over 2 million in sales. And then an individual knocked on my door one day in my office near Salt Lake City, and asked if my business was for sale. And I was like, no, I just started the hospice, but I said, I'll talk to you, but it doesn't.
Did you start thinking, well, maybe it should be?
I'm going to probably get more into this, but home health and hospice is tough when your government, when your primary customer, I don't care what business it is, but if your primary customer is the government, you don't have any negotiation power. And I started to feel a little bit of that. And so it was, and it wasn't, it ended up taking, it was over a year after that, but that individual connected me with a guy who's a partner today, for some home care businesses. But yeah, it ended up working out. And so I sold that in 2018.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
Congratulations. And you've gone on to do a bunch more stuff in the senior care industry.
Yeah.
So what did you do after the sale of your business, of your home
So
health?
I stayed on for a year. And this was at the end of 2019, not knowing that COVID was right around the corner, not even thinking about it. I started a consulting company, which is the Lighten Group. And I was doing home health and hospice consulting. There was January 1st, 2020 was when PDGM was introduced as a regulation in home care. It was a billing procedure. And so I ended up getting quite a few clients. I went to many conferences in 2019 and got a good book of business. But COVID came, and that kind of stalled the consulting. I still do a fair amount of consulting, but when 2020 hit and COVID came, I couldn't go to the conference. I couldn't do the marketing like I was before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a friend who was wanting to get into senior care, and I was like, you got to think about home care, private pay home care. And long story short, he ended up buying, we ended up buying a business in Southern California, a home care business that was well established. Learned about it through a friend, and that's Pacific Coast Home Care in Simi Valley, California. And so started working that. And after a year or so, my partner thought, this isn't quite for me. And COVID was still pretty strong. I wasn't really able to reestablish consulting. And so I ended up buying him out and have since purchased an agency in Idaho and in Utah. So I have 3 agencies in 3 different states and looking to acquire more.
So, okay, first question, because I have a lot of questions on that. How you're expanding, right? But you're expanding in different geographic territories in different states. How are you doing that successfully?
Well, it's all about people. The as an entrepreneur, there's only so much you can do. And I really have a philosophy around, I read something in a book that just stuck with me from the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. And it said, if you're spending any more than 20% of your time on administrative tasks, you're not going to grow. And
I really needed to hear that today.
I've seen that over and over and over in this business, where someone's a nurse, or maybe they have a good business mind, and so they want to, you want to, do your own thing and have the freedom of being an entrepreneur, but you can only scale to the level of one person's capacity, and a lot of times in home care you can make a living doing it, but how are you going to grow and how are you going to expand if you're the one that's doing the billing and the scheduling and handling all of the personnel problems and clients and all those? You just can't.
So what's your advice to those agencies? Because I know I've been working with home care agencies across the country for a while now, and they're at that stage where they feel like, wow, I really need some help. I'm underwater, but I can't afford to pay for the help. And so they just kind of tread water. What's your advice to them so that way they can do what you're advising?
Well, I have a few thoughts on that, some little techniques. I'll share one little technique, and that is get out of the office, right? When, I'm at my house right now, right? I'm not in any of my offices, and I don't spend a ton of time in any of my offices. There's a lot we can do remotely, but the reality is that when you go into the office, you're going to get sucked into things that you otherwise wouldn't. So that's just a little tactic that I've learned is just, get out of the office. And I've spent a lot of time working at restaurants, at grocery stores, when I have little kids at home. I'm at home right now because my kids are all in school, but for a while there, I had little kids knocking on the door and didn't quite work. So, I spent a lot of time working out of coffee shops and grocery stores, and found that to be a lot more effective. You just have to get out of the weeds, and getting out of the office is a good way to get out of the weeds. The other thing that I've kind of gone back and forth on this, and this is kind of bigger picture on your question about what do I do if I'm, underwater. I think the reality is that entrepreneurship is not for everyone, and that's not what people want to hear.
It's a lot of work, right?
It's a lot of work. And, there's a couple books that I recommend, E-Myth Revisited. I read back in college.
On my nightstand.
Old book. Okay. So, there's just this mentality of, okay, well, I'm a really good nurse, and I'm really good at, providing care, but that may be 30% of the business, right? You got to think about your marketing and your accounting and your payroll and, all of the things, insurance, and so much problem solving. You need to be a high level problem solver in this business, right? Because there's just, especially if you're not a franchise, you have to figure out stuff on your own. Right. You have to be really good at networking, and you have to be comfortable, walking up to an event and sitting down with 4 strangers and, just getting to know people and building your network. And so the and not everyone's comfortable with that.
So what I'm hearing you say, Trevor, is before you launch into this, really take an account of where you are strong, so that way you can make sure that you find people that are complementary, right, in your weak areas. What
Yeah.
about those owners that feel like, well, I don't have the capital, right, to hire this person yet? But have you, in your experience, found that if they take that leap, right, that risk, that the reward ends up being worth it because they are freed up to be able to do what they're strong at and to be able to actually scale the business because they're not so in the weeds?
I'm very conservative by nature. I'm very debt averse. And that doesn't always go well in entrepreneurship, because you're taking a risk, especially, if you've got a family, you've got people counting, you're counting on an income. But I would very much say, Sarah, that it depends. It depends on the situation and the person and the plan, right? If you've got a good plan and you're confident in your plan, absolutely. And I mean, I've taken risks. Absolutely. I've signed papers that have made me feel very, very uncomfortable. Anyone in entrepreneurship
That
has.
nauseous feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, but calculated risks, and very, very well thought out risk reward. What am I doing here? And having a plan and sticking to it. But you have to. I mean, the reality is that if you're not comfortable taking on risks, that's another thing that you have to be able to check that box in entrepreneurship. I mean, I could go on and on and on, right? Like, as far as it can be so difficult. I mean, you have to have good support in your relationships. And, I credit my wife for that. We've been married for almost 21 years.
That's amazing.
And she's been, by my side, and it's been tough at times, but you need to have that support. And so I would say, yes, absolutely. They're, taking the leap of faith. If you've got money in a car and that's what you need to refinance your car, to use that to get the administrative employee, that absolutely, like, that can be life-changing.
A game changer, right, for the direction. So this idea of, because I have noticed, well, I'm even guilty of it. When I started Connect Elders, I didn't do a business plan. I just said, okay, I'm going to do this. And then you realize, which direction am I going, right? And so I see home care companies that kind of do the same thing. Like you said, oh, I'm a really good nurse. I'm a really good social worker. I've had this life-changing experience with a loved one. I want to start my business. Now, taking the time, I'm hearing you say it's important that they sit down and take the time to do the plan. Now, when should they recognize, though, and how often should they be reevaluating that plan to determine, is what I'm doing working, or do I need to make some adjustments? Because sometimes there's a plan and then they just get so stuck in, this was the plan, but it might not be the best plan for the business.
Right. You say you're guilty of it. I mean, I'm absolutely guilty of it. I've tried to you can't forecast out, like, you want to have a good vision of your plan and think, like, okay, where do I want this to go? And what is my extra? You want to be thinking about all of those things before you do it, and definitely put pen to paper and put a plan and put a pro forma together. But it changes so rapidly. And I would say, multiple times throughout the week, I journal. I've got a little notebook and I write down all my roles and responsibilities. And I'm like, what's the very most important thing to do? And so I will sit down and I will go through company by company priorities, and I will list out my priorities. And I do that sometimes multiple times per week. You have to be able to adjust and adapt. If I searched my Google Drive here, I'd probably find 100 different pro formas and budgets, probably more, of different times that I've sat down. What does this quarter look like, and what does that quarter look like? You want to have that big picture, Vision is critical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that vision needs to guide you. So
Mm-hmm.
what is my plan over the next 5, 10 years? What do I want to do with that? I mean, right now I'm in the spot where I'm like, okay, I want, several more locations in the Intermountain West, and that's my vision. That's my plan. And so that kind of guides my decision making. But then the day to day, you've got to make constant and frequent changes to that plan.
Right. So let's kind of switch gears a little bit, because that's the second time that you've mentioned that you are in an active acquisition mode right now. So anybody that's listening live or will watch the recording, what are some indications that maybe they're
It's time
wanting
to
to
sell.
sell? Because sometimes they think about it, there's a bad day, and they're like, nope, I'm refreshed, I can do this. Or, what would trigger for them that they should reach out to you?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's my acquisition strategy has been knocking on doors. Ironically, I've actually only found one that I paid, or that a broker was used. A friend of a friend was getting a divorce, and so that kind of started the process. Um, it's a great question. I think my gut says is that, are you having fun? Right? Like, I'm a firm believer that if you're not performing well, it's because you're not in the right place. The as not to go off on a tangent too much, but if good entrepreneurs know when they need to let people go. And I've had to do that several times over my career. But at least 8 out of 10 times they end up in a better situation than they were with you. Well,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same thing as an entrepreneur. If you're not succeeding or you're not having fun, then you're not in the right spot, right? Maybe you want to run a business. Maybe you want to do something else entirely. Maybe you want to look at a different industry. Another piece of advice that has really stuck with me is that you've kind of got like 10-year window. We have 10-year windows in our careers that you really need to do something big, a change every 10 years. If I go back to when I was selling pharmaceuticals, I had an uncle was in the business, and he was in his mid 50s, and he had been in pharmaceuticals. And, my dad was, he worked for Johnson and Johnson doing something similar, but, back in the 80s and 90s, getting one of those jobs and writing it out for 30 years with a pension, like, that was pretty good. And that's what I envisioned for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the way the corporate world works anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I remember I was probably, I must have been like, late 20s, 26, 27. My uncle was in his mid 50s, and he got let go from Abbott Pharmaceuticals in his mid 50s. And his life has been, he's a happy guy, but he's really struggled, I think, to make it through the rest of his career. And I started looking around at the people who were like 45, 50, 55, and they're just clinging to these jobs that they are like, I have to, and I would tell my wife, I'm like, I can't do that. Like, I don't want to be reliant on a corporation like that. I don't want to feel like scared, for my family and for my retirement. I can't do that. And so I took that leap. But we have to do something big like that every 10 years. So maybe, you've been doing it and you've been having fun, to get back to your question, is it time to sell? But you're not having fun anymore, and that's okay. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, I would say, like, you don't want to, or if you're struggling, the business is struggling, you don't want to get to a point where you're having a fire sale.
That is great advice. And so could you explain for the audience what you mean by that?
Well, if you're having a slow, you're kind of losing 10, 20% a year, and and the business is struggling. You want to get out on top. You want to do like John Elway. I'm from Denver. I'm a big John Elway fan. So he went out after winning 2 Super Bowls, right? You want to leave in a position of strength. And if you're clinging and you're holding on and you're not having fun, you're going to have that fire sale where the business isn't worth what it may have been 2 years ago because you kind of just,
Delayed the
delayed it.
inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
We
it's
do have a
a position of strength, right? Where you've got good books
Mhm.
and you've got good growth and you've got a good reason. And that will really help your multiple when you sell.
I've often heard, actually, Kanu Kushal from the Independent Home Care Alliance, he owns Senior Care or Senior Solutions, a home care agency, and I've heard him say numerous times, every home care owner should be treating their business and growing their business as if they want to sell tomorrow, right? So that way you are positioned well when the time comes.
Yes.
So that's great advice. So we
Well, and
do
every
have
business should have an exit plan too, right? It's like that you may not use your exit plan, it may be delayed, but have that in mind so you can build towards it, right? I'd like to
Mhm.
sell when I'm 60. I'd like to retire when I'm 55 from this, or whatever the case
And
is.
it can change, right?
It can change, usually does, but have that as so you're building towards something,
A
not
goal.
just writing it out forever.
Right, right. A goal in mind of your ultimate
Yeah.
right destination. So we do have a question from the audience. Are you open to a personal care home sale?
Depend honestly. If I'm reading that right, so like a group home or a California
RCFE,
or
boarding
residential
care.
care, yeah, RCFE. You know, I would like to look at any possibilities, and I'll inquire about them. I have considered strongly RCFE in California, but I've been so jaded, and we could do a sidebar on this if you want, by working with Medicare and Medicaid. And particularly, I don't want to get political, but particularly in blue states, California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, I am very leery about working in those states. I've experienced, my partner has experienced awful things with the regulatory agencies in those states. I mean, I'm from the West. I live in the West, so I know the West. So it depends on where it is.
Yeah.
The I'd consider it. I've looked at it for California. Ultimately, I've put that to the back burner because I studied the regulations closely, and there's just a little too much power when it comes to what the state is able to do.
hmm
Yeah.
So this person says it's in Georgia. I will say I feel like I don't know if there's boarding cares in Tennessee. They call them homes for the aged, but just in my experience in Tennessee, I feel like there needs to be a lot more of them available to serve
Yeah.
the need. So as an
Mhm.
investment opportunity, I see an opportunity in that area in Tennessee specifically.
Yeah. Gosh, the reality is that the silver tsunami that's going to peak in the late 2020s and early 2030s, what are we going to do
I don't
with
know.
all of these? We need strong, innovative people to come up with good solutions. Um, when it comes to for those in the audience, my rule is that it's got to be within a 2-hour flight of Salt Lake. That's the rule that I set up for acquisitions. And so that includes the entire West Coast. And not that I'm not willing, it just depends on the kind of business
Mhm.
um, in the state. Um, my business partner, his dad started getting into building assisted livings, but on the smaller side. Most of his buildings are about 8 to 16.
Mhm.
Um, his dad started building them in the 90s and has 20 facilities in Oregon, 20 facilities in Idaho, and 20 facilities in Colorado. But the state has essentially put him out of business in Colorado and Oregon. The staffing regulations, the COVID heavy-handedness has put him in a difficult spot. So my what I'm really targeting, I'm very interested in Nevada,
Okay.
and more in Southern California.
Okay.
I've think I've cracked the code on California and operating home care in California, and I'm comfortable with it. So, I'm looking to expand in California.
Mm-hmm. A
And
particular size? Are you looking for a particular revenue amount?
not necessarily. I've gone big. I bought a $2 million agency, and I mean that's big for me, anyways. $2 million agency in Simi Valley, and then I spent about 40,000 on an agency in a rural Idaho.
So it just depends on all of the facets of the.
Absolutely. I will say that buying bigger has been easier. And so, if it were, it depends where it is, if it's within if I spend a lot of time working on these acquisitions, it takes a ton of time. I mean, I've never been busier in my life than during the acquisition phase, being acquired or doing the acquiring. It's so much time. And so I have to be thoughtful of that. If it were, near an agency that they currently have, like I'd be more open to going smaller. But if it were, in an area that I'd have to invest a fair amount of time, I'd want to go bigger.
So you would just evaluate the opportunity. That
Yeah.
makes total sense. One of my dear friends and favorite people, Michelle Simmons, she owns a home care company out in Texas. So her question is, what is the typical purchase price for a home care one-time revenue? 1x revenue, excuse me.
Yeah. I don't think revenue is the number that they look at. Home health hospice, it's different. But if you're talking private pay home care, it's going to be more like a 3.5 or 4 times earnings.
Okay. And if she has further questions, I'm happy to connect you to dear friend Mike, Sarah, wonderful people. So he's referring to you as wonderful. This conversation is definitely highly informative, and I can feel your passion for the industry too. Okay, so what are the various types of senior care businesses that are available to entrepreneurs that want to get into this space?
Yeah, great question. If you're looking at running an agency, right, which is where you don't have a building of any kind, you have a small office for rent, I should say. You're running an agency. There's home care, home health, and hospice. That's definitely my area of expertise. I've been, I'm currently consulting a hospice company in Texas. I've done hospice in Arizona, Washington, Oregon, home, and I've obviously owned a hospice company. I work with an individual who was a JACO accredited surveyor. So, someone who knows the process in and out. The next business would be home care, which I know extensively. That's the one that, and maybe my personal experience or I'm a little overly jaded on it, but that's a tough one. And I have thoughts on that. And home care. So, what I tell people is, I've had many people come and say, hey, should I do home health, for example? So we'll start with the area that I have the most experience in and have been involved with the longest, home health. And what I say to those individuals is, where are your referrals coming from? Right? If you don't have a very solid channel to receive referrals through, and I would say it needs to be a vertically integrated business. So, a therapist, for example. Well, I know tons of people, and I'm a really, really good therapist. Well, if you don't have a building or you're not tied into a building, I would not and not necessarily that I would if you are, but I definitely wouldn't recommend just starting a home health and factoring, that you're going to get your business from the community and different referral sources. The home health and hospice is just it's under consolidation. It's too consolidated. It's becoming more and more vertically integrated. Hospice is a little bit different, in my opinion. Hospice, the Medicare tends to pick on home health like 10 times more than they pick on
Really?
hospice. Yeah, it's not that it's easy, but home health, it's like 10 times the work for the kind of the same amount of revenue in my experience. Um, but you have to ask yourself the same question, right? Like you can build a, if you can get 20 hospice patients, you can have a nice business that's worth something. But where are you going to get them? So home health, hospice, we could go into greater depth on those. I have a lot of experience with them, but that's my personal opinion, is that be very leery of both, frankly. I'd be more inclined to look at hospice and than I would home health, but either one. But I mean, I don't want to flip flop here, but it really, like, if you have a building, if you have a channel, if you have some sort of like, then yeah, get into the
What
business.
I hear you saying is if you are going to choose to do home health or hospice, please, what I hear you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, please make sure that you have a solid launch pad of referral sources to start.
Not even referral, because referral sources can flip, right?
Okay.
For home health, absolutely, I wouldn't do it unless unless it's vertically integrated, meaning that it's a SNF starting a home health,
Got
a
it.
group of assisted living facilities that are starting a home health. That I wouldn't do it otherwise. I really wouldn't.
Okay, so okay, I'm glad that I asked. So, because I was thinking an individual that decided they wanted to start a home health company, but you're saying really what you're advising is if you already have a business, adding it to integrate it in.
Right. So,
Okay.
the hospice agency in Texas. So this person has worked in a skilled nursing facility as an administrator for like 10, I think even 15 years. So has 16 buildings. Now, the building isn't buying the hospice. If it were, I mean, I think that's what they should do. I'm surprised that they aren't. But it's her kind of spinning off and doing it. She has a lot of connections. So with hospice, it's a little bit different because you don't need to scale as large as you do in hospice to be successful as you do in home health. You need a lot of volume in home health, and you have a lot of fixed costs in home health, a little more so than hospice. So, I would say I know the West really well. I mentioned the states that I've worked in, but I've never, California just barely became a certificate of need state for hospice. And so, this could change, right? If you had New Jersey, from what I understand, has 60 home health companies. Population of New Jersey, I want to say it's something like 15 million. Utah has 3 million people and it has 100 home health agencies. So 100 for 3 million people. And then in New Jersey, they have 60 for 15 million people. So if you have a license in New Jersey or are able to finagle a certificate of need license in New Jersey, it's a different situation. So I just want to add that caveat that that's my, I know the West well, but I don't.
Is this what you help people figure out too, as part of the Lighten group, whether even if they don't already have an established home health or hospice company or home care company, but if they're thinking about doing it, you could walk them through the process.
Yes. Yeah. I have a company that I worked with extensively in Erie, Pennsylvania, right? Not knowing the rules and regs. Most of home health and hospice, like 80% of the rules and regs are federal, right? So they're consistent. Okay. But each state has different nuances. And so, this agency, they had group homes. They were working with disabled and they're like, we were tired of working with 20 different agencies. We want to start our own. And they did a home health agency and it made sense for them. Okay. And it's worked well. So, yes, absolutely. People can call me, they can inquire and I'll, kind of talk to them about their situation. I've worked with, in Pittsburgh, Texas, Pennsylvania, but I know the West really, really well.
When should an established home health or hospice company reach out to you for your guidance and your support?
Yeah. So my expertise is when it comes to home health, my expertise really at this point is financial, how to, financially run a successful business. I've built several tools that allow agencies to monitor utilization. Utilization is the name of the game in home health.
Mhm.
So established agencies that are having utilization problems. What I mean by that is like, hey, my labor costs are too high, and how do I deal with that?
Mhm.
Absolutely, those agencies have been able to help several agencies to tackle that problem and put some rules in place to fix that. Um, I do accreditation, so I've done lots and lots in different states, so they can reach out if they're looking to get into it, like we said, or expand. So for an agency that's established but wants to expand into another state, they could reach out to me for that purpose.
Mhm.
Those are probably the two areas that I would say that I'm doing right now. I used to have some marketing packages and things like that. I don't do that anymore.
It's more on the financial side, understanding.
Financial and home health and an accreditation, new starts, expansion with home health and hospice.
Mhm. And then the third, so you had mentioned home care, but the business, the entrepreneurial opportunities that you're focusing on for people that want to get into the space, home health, hospice, and home care, right? Um, do you feel that there's going to be just a ever increasing need for home care agencies to be established?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. The two areas that I'm most bullish on are home care and independent living.
Mm.
Independent living there's a huge need for that, right? It's lower cost. If you think about who's been hurt in the economy the most, it's the very young and the very old.
Yeah.
So seniors' budgets are being squeezed, and independent living is far less expensive than assisted living, and so that's a spot where I think there's going to be a lot of growth. And I would in independent living, I would also throw in 55 and older communities.
Mhm.
Um, I've actually toyed around with, and this may be something down the road with the snowbird model of people going to Arizona or Florida and living in a trailer for the winter, and they play pickleball and tennis and they have community events. And my sister-in-law's parents, they do that. They live in Canada, and then they go to Arizona for 6 months every winter. They live in a nice trailer in a community. Well, and then they go up to Canada for the summer. Well, there's really not, like, what are all these seniors going to do? What if you're 60 years old and you don't own a home right now? You know, um, we need to come up with good housing solutions for seniors. Um, and so I've been thinking about, like, how do you build affordable housing in not only the areas that seniors want to live in the winter, but in northern climates, right?
So something like where their lease is for part of the year, knowing that they're gonna
I
go
think
down
so.
there, but then somebody else moves in. So kind of like a home share dynamic.
Well, the model for Arizona is that you're renting land and you're putting a trailer on it, right?
Okay.
So, that's one model. Like, I think, look at my mom, for example, right? So she doesn't like the Utah climate, but her kids live here, so she wants to stay here. So, but how do you do that affordable? Well, you know, let's think about. I, I I can't say, I'm not an expert on it, and
No, but I love that you're
I'm
thinking
thinking
about it
about,
and you're
like,
thinking about trying to figure out something that's innovative,
right,
that's going to really solve the problem.
right. Like, you can, you could do the same thing in Utah, where you have kind of a community where people rent out space. So you own some land. Your employee costs are very low, right? You've got like a community center. And so it's a place where seniors would want to live, but they can do it affordably in the areas that they want to live. And I don't know if I'll feel differently when I'm 85, but I would not want to live in Arizona in the summer or Florida. Um,
Right.
so like these northern climates where people maybe, would want to spend their summers, but have that same model of the, senior communities in the South.
What about, and I'm going to a different topic, it triggered in my mind. What about these areas, for instance, back where I'm from, small town Maine, southern Maine, but it's very small towns. And I've recently had people that I grew up with reaching out to me, and there are just not home care companies. There's not, senior
Yeah.
communities. There's like one place where people go. And, um, you know, what do you have to say about that? Because I mean, I'm
Well,
thinking about my mom in the future. I'm thinking about, okay, well, I get maybe why a home care company hasn't established there, because they're looking at the area thinking there's not enough money, right? Private pay clients, or maybe there's not going to be enough caregivers to serve the need. But more and more over the years, right, since I left home, more people do leave the town, whereas before they would stay closer to family.
right.
And there's a
So,
lack of housing too, huge lack of housing.
right. Let's talk about the home care side, because we haven't delved too much into the details on that. My experience is that, you go to any home care conference today, you're all going to say some form of the same thing, and that is that the demand exceeds the supply. There's more demand. Now, that's not always the case, but I would say in 75% of the time that I've been in the business, that I have more business than I do staffing. And 25% of the time I have more staffing than I do business. So you need to keep both engines humming at the same time. So, I'm in Ventura County, California, that's 1 million people. But I also have a very, very rural agency in Twin Falls, Idaho. It's a town of 50,000 people. And so I'm like, gosh, is Twin going to be able to satisfy, like, what's the market like in Twin Falls? And so a lot of rural agencies do well. There's a lot of demand for people who do want to stay where they are and stay in their home. And so, Twin Falls, town of 50,000 people, we've been more than busy and growing strong. So, when you talk about a rural Maine, in my case, rural Idaho, there's still a lot of demand. I think there's a lot of things like, what's the industry in those, like you want to look at the wealth in those areas.
Logging, I think that they would probably have to do Medicaid business, right, in addition to private pay in that area. I mean, I don't know for sure. I'm just guessing. But what I do know is that there's a need that's not being filled.
There is, and we could do a whole sidebar on Medicaid home care. I don't do it. I won't do it.
Well, I deal with agencies that do it and some that don't and some that do both. But I do know for sure over the last 3 years, especially, there's been this desperation to get more private pay for those that do Medicaid.
The states, they don't do the cost benefit analysis, and I've dealt with it. I've dealt with it with Medicaid, Medicare, and that's just my personal rule. Learn things the hard way, but I know people do it. It's a volume play, right?
And I'm glad that they do, right? Like, I have this gratitude really to the agencies that are willing to do it, because somebody needs to. I would never own a home care company personally, but if I did, I would do just private pay. So when I think about the agencies that are doing it, I'm really grateful that they do.
Also because there's enough business. I mean, Twin Falls is an agricultural town, and there's enough private pay. There's a lot of people who've moved from California to Idaho, and so we if it were Twin Falls 30 years ago, maybe that wouldn't have been the case. But but you want to look at that and see if you can service a big enough market, right? But I wouldn't say that just because it's a agricultural town at its roots, that it's not going to be able to sustain a private pay home care company.
That's good insight. There's a lot of land, and land is very affordable, right? And so what I could see happening, right, is somebody starting boarding cares in the district where I'm from, right? And I think that would be a really good solution. But that's another conversation we could have. It's just, it is at the forefront of my mind just because of the recent, several people reaching out from back home asking about resources. And it makes me sad that it's been nearly impossible to find some.
I mean, that's where I go back to independent living, right? And I think that's a winner, independent living. Building a 60 room facility. I think that it's good now. It's going to be really good and very high demand every year until it starts to fizzle a little bit more in the late 2030s.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you've said, right, there's undoubtedly a need for more and more people to establish non-medical home care companies. What's your advice for anybody that's considering doing it?
Yeah, you want to look at your own backyard, right? And think if you can service the area that you're in. You've got two options. You've got franchises and independent. Mm-hmm. I don't look at franchises, but I will say that's a good option for some people. Scalability is the big issue with franchises. So, if you're looking to build something big, something that you could potentially retire off of selling, it's going to be hard as a franchise owner. If you're looking to make a living, then you could look at franchises. Also, look at your skill set, right? Mm-hmm. So there are consulting companies. I think you do it. As far as I know, the helping home care agencies get off the ground.
And I help them get clients. Yeah.
Okay.
Not operations, not finances, marketing, biz dev, sales. So like you're strong in financials and operations. So
gotcha. Yeah. So look at your state regs. I mean, I work in California, and so if you're going to use California as hard as it could be business wise, I will say it's fairly it's very doable in home care. So if you're thinking about home care in any state, look at the state regs. I've looked at it in Washington, for example. You have a license every couple of years. It's very, very doable, very affordable. The fixed costs are lower, unless you do a franchise because they want a big chunk of change up front. Mm-hmm. So I'd look at the area that you want to serve. Look at your skill set. I would talk to franchises, but I would also strongly consider independent. And that's something that I've started to get into, but I think 2-3 years from now I'll have more options for agencies who just want to launch as an independent.
So you would help them get started just like you do with home health and hospice. You would start helping home care agencies.
Yeah, a couple of years from now I want to have a good just an open what do they call it? Where you've got your business plan, you've got your policy manuals, you've got everything laid out from your franchisor. And mm-hmm. So as a franchisee, it's turnkey. I think that's the word that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Have more of a turnkey operation. Right now, I can help agencies who are kind of exploring and give them advice. But I don't have a turnkey solution. I know that there are some out there that do. So really, I would start by saying like it of the three. I mean, I'm in the business. I'm bullish on it. If you think that if you think that you'd be a good entrepreneur, I strongly consider it. It's not easy. Business is easy. Anyone who tells you that any business that you get into is easy is lying to you or sugarcoating things. It's not. But if you've got the energy and the resources to get off the ground. You can go without a paycheck for a few months. And if you've got those pieces in place, then I would strongly consider home care.
The need is certainly there.
The need's there.
Based on the statistics, right? There is no doubt in that. So Trevor, great conversation. I really appreciate you being here. What are some other triggers for people? When should they call you?
Yeah, I've been helped by mentors, many, and so I want to give back in that sense. So I'm happy to receive calls and take conversations. But I would say it's exactly what we described. Like, I'm thinking about getting into it. I'm happy to take those calls, but definitely, if you're looking for, call me if you're looking to be sold, if you want to be acquired. That's the part that I'm most interested in right now, because that's what I'm more focused on. But absolutely, home health hospice accreditation, I've got a very, very good fast path to that. And if there's anyone listening who does home health and is having a hard time with utilization, I've got very unique, awesome tools to help those that are struggling with keeping their labor costs in line.
Wonderful. I would love it if you could email me those things you just said, so I can make sure I share that when I post the recording, because that way people will be able to look at it and easily identify when they need to reach out to you. You clearly have a wealth of knowledge and a really good demeanor in explaining things, which I think is super important, right? Like, you can convey it in a way that people will be able to pick up on the information. I really appreciate you being my guest today, and I need to make sure that I thank our sponsors. So we have Retirement Genius, my good friend Chris Orestes, who is the sponsor of the Empowering Aging podcast. He's all things alternative funding solutions to pay for care. And so huge thanks to him. And again, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.